Developed by Rundisc and published by the indie label of Focus Entertainment, Chants of Sennaar is a puzzle game inspired by the myth of the Babel Tower, where the player translates different languages and climbs the floors to get to the top. When you start the game, you have to go through some quick puzzles that give you an idea of what the logograms represent, and after that the game will introduce the notebook, where you'll be able to take notes of the possible meanings. You're not required to fill those notes immediately, since some symbols will only be figured out later, but filling them will have the game feel the sentences that are being spoken to you show up with the possible answer you wrote in your notebook. And once you associate the right symbols with the right meanings, the game will give you the answer. At first, figuring out what each symbol means depends more on context and interactions with NPCs and environments. But later you can find tablets and signs that function as Rosetta Stones that also help to translate each language. Keeping with the languages, there are 5 languages in total, each corresponding to one of the 5 floors in the tower. The language reflects the culture of the group that lives in the respective floor, and each being unique not only in visual style, but also in the way it structures its words and sentences. Some languages speak in a subject-verb-object structure, but others change this order. The way the language structures itself is also important, since besides deciphering the language, the player also has to re-establish the communication between the different groups. This is done by accessing terminals spread throughout the tower and translating the messages that NPCs are trying to send. These tend to be the hardest puzzles in the game, since they require the player to understand not just the words, but also how the sentences are formed. There are also some environmental puzzles, but these are more spread out and are a bit on the easier side, since they are not the focus of the game. There is also a highlight mechanic, where pressing a button will highlight what parts of the environment are interactable and what parts are just background. This helps a lot since despite the environments having pretty clear design with simple color schemes, sometimes interactable objects blend with the background. And if you don't use the highlight button, you might end up walking in circles trying to figure out where is the clue you missed. Each floor is designed reflecting the culture that lives in said floor, and the player for the most part has some freedom to explore it. But there will definitely be some parts that will require the player to know the language of the area before progressing. And while the areas aren't very complex, there might be 1 or 2 moments where the player might find itself wandering around trying to figure out where to go next. A very important aspect for the exploration are the terminals that are spread around the tower, since not only they serve as part of the messaging puzzles, they also function as quick travel points to allow the player to quickly go back to previous areas. Chants of Sennaar is a great game, but the last quarter of it feels very rushed and exposes the problems it has. One issue is that it starts to rely a lot more on Rosetta Stones to decipher the languages, particularly the last one. It also shows how slow it is to move around and how backtracking in this game isn't rewarding. The developers probably felt this as well, since the teleporters are all positioned close to the important areas of each floor, and the groups reconnecting with each other leads to just some minor changes, like some NPCs showing up in a different floor without having anything to say, or a slight difference in the environment. The game also allows the player to examine objects that you find, but with one exception, it never does anything with this mechanic. It is just there. This was my review for Chants of Sennaar. It is a great puzzle game and a recommendation for anyone that enjoyed Return of the Obra Dinn or The Case of the Golden Idol. If you agree, disagree, or want to add something, leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you around.